everybody. Welcome to the Build, Renovate, Decorate stage here. We've got Darren Hughes from Tiny Houses Australia who's going to speak to you now. Take it away, Darren.
Thank you. Hello, I'm on. Thank you guys for coming down to see us. Yes, I'm Darren Hughes, one half of the Tiny Houses Australia team. My other half, Lisa, over there on the camera, made me promise last night not to draw attention to her, so I won't do that. But I'm here today, you guys, I've done it for 3 days. She's going on, really? Again? I'm here to get you guys thinking outside the box a little bit and to put forward an idea to you guys that my partner and I and thousands of other people around Australia and around the world believe could bring real benefits to many types of people in Australia and could go somewhat towards addressing these issues that Australia faces of affordable housing, low-income earners, housing the homeless, etc. But before we get into that, let me ask you a question. How do you think you might feel if you had no mortgage? If you had no personal debt at all? If you had minimal daily, weekly expenses, minimal stress in your life, and if you had the time and cash flow freedom to do more of those things that you really want to be doing, whether that be fishing or your art or photography or walking the dog on the beach, and if you had the time or more time to spend with those people that you really care about, your friends, your family, your partner, your children, you'd probably feel something like that. And I know a lot of you probably think, yeah, but that's unrealistic in 2016. You can't do it. Everyone's got a mortgage. Everyone's up to their eyeballs in debt. It is possible, and people all over Australia are doing it at the moment. And it has something to do with something called tiny houses. Now, just to give us an idea, by a show of hands, has anyone ever even heard of tiny houses here? Is this totally foreign to, okay. So some of you have heard of them. Some of you might be thinking, what is that? I've never seen that before in my life. So what is the tiny house movement? And it very much is a movement. There is a shift happening, and there are lots and lots of people all over Australia and around the world that are starting to ask themselves questions. And they're starting to ask themselves, well, what do I really want out of life? What really makes me happy? What's important to me in my life? Is it going to work 60, 70 hours a week and stressing out over the bills? You know, they're overworked, they're overstressed, they want to relax, they want to spend more quality time with the people they care about, they want to have more fun, they want to have more adventures, they want to spend more time doing those things that they get a kick out of. And a lot of people are also wanting to, they're wanting to downsize, they're wanting to simplify their life. They also want to have a lower and a smaller footprint on the environment. So they want to lead a more sustainable, a more environmentally friendly, and a more intentional way of life. But why are we downsizing? Why do people want to simplify and downsize? There's a couple of main reasons. In 2016, and even in recent generations, success and this idea of having made it seems to have come to a point where it's somehow measured by the amount of money that you have, the clothes that you wear, the brand clothes that you wear, the sort of gadgets that you own, the badge on the front of your car, the size of your house, the suburb in which you live. And a lot of people are starting to question that. Is that really what life is about? Or is it more perhaps about moments and about collecting experiences and the relationships with the people that you have close to you? The other main reason why a lot of people are looking at simplifying and downsizing their life is because of that. The Australian real estate industry. Now, as you guys probably know, real estate prices are going through the roof. Australia at the moment is the most indebted country on the planet. Our debt to income ratios are through the roof. Rents are at record highs. And this idea of this great Australian dream, young Australians trying to get their foot in the door of the property ladder and buy their first home, it's becoming more and more unobtainable, and for a lot of people it's just simply become impossible. For example, did you know that the average house in Australia now is $695,000? Now that's the average. In Sydney, you don't even want to know, it's like 980 something thousand. But that's the average price of a regular old house in Australia at the moment, $695,000. The average loan that people are signing papers for at the moment over the last 12 months in Australia is $416,000. That's a lot of money to be borrowing. And the number that shocked me more than anything was this one. The average first home loan written in the last 12 months, $330,000. Now this is young Australians, this is your older kids, young Australians wanting to get their foot in the door. They're trying to, at the same time, they're trying to start their careers or go to university and study, and they're signing papers on $330,000 loans. That's the average, some are more than that. So that's a lot of money, that's a lot of interest, and that's a lot of financial pressure for a young person or a young couple, I'm sure you'd agree. So can this idea of a tiny house go some way towards addressing these issues? And we believe they can. Now just on that actually, the other thing to take into account, thank you Lisa as she points it out to me, if people are not covering mortgage payments, okay, then they're covering rents, which are averaging $485 a week at the moment. So they're trying to cover rent, they're trying to put food on the table, they're trying to cover the bills, run the car, maintain some sort of relationship hopefully, have some kind of social life, and at the same time, somehow save up $100,000 or more, which is the deposit you're going to need to then qualify for one of these things. So as you can understand, a lot of people are feeling like, where does it end? They feel like they're on this mouse wheel, almost like a scary roller coaster ride. They want to get off, but they don't know how. And they don't see a way out of the system that's somehow evolved. So yes, do we believe that tiny houses could form part of the solution? Certainly. We're not saying that tiny houses will form the one solution for everyone. If you've got 4 or 5 teenage kids and they play golf, cricket and scuba dive, you're not going to fit, right? But it's, for a lot of the types of people in Australia, this is going to make sense. But firstly, what is a tiny house? What do we mean by a tiny house? Now, when people talk about going tiny and living small, it could be a micro small studio apartment in the city where they really make use of the space. It could be a house truck. It could be a caravan. My partner and I actually just spent the last 12 months living in a 1974 15-foot vintage caravan. That was an experience for a brand new relationship, but she is still talking to me, so that's a good sign. But generally, in the tiny house community, when we talk about a tiny house, generally we refer to a tiny house on a trailer. Now, incidentally, that's the very first tiny house that I came across online. It's called Proto House. It's in the States. And I thought, I was going down the rabbit hole. You know, you get on YouTube or Facebook and you go, oh, what's this? And that leads to something else, and that leads to something else. And I spotted this. I thought, what's that? And the more that I looked into it, and the more that I looked into the tiny house movement and the concept of a tiny house and the advantages that it has, the more it made sense. And we'll talk about some of the advantages and disadvantages, because there are some in a moment. But the key word here, you guys, is house. These are designed, unlike a caravan, and no disrespect to anyone traveling Australia, living full-time out of a caravan, because it can be done. But these are designed and built from the ground up to be a permanent, full-time residence. They're built to the normal standards of a normal house. They've got a timber construction or sometimes a steel frame. You can do both. But they're well insulated and well constructed. They're well ventilated as well. And they've got all the things that you need in a house. They've got a place to cook your meals and you know, you need a kitchen, so they've got a kitchen. They've got a bathroom, you know, a place where you can wash and have a shower after your day at work. They have a bedroom. Now these images are not all from the same tiny house. These are just a couple of collections of images. But this one here is a sleeping loft. Generally in a tiny house, your sleeping situation is either upstairs, yes, they're upstairs, in a loft type situation like this. Or if people don't want to deal with ladders and stairs, then some tiny houses have been designed with lower level, single floor, single level design. But there's a sleeping area, of course. And of course, you need an area where you can hang out, relax, watch a movie, have a drink, and or run your business, as is in the case with this one. This is actually the tiny house of Vina Listato from Soul House Design in California. She's an architect. She runs her business from that tiny house as well. So yes, they're small, obviously. And just on that, did you know that Australia currently has the largest homes on the planet? The average Australian freestanding new house that's being built out there at the moment is 243 square metres. So with a tiny house, what we do is we keep all the bits of the house that we do need, and we get rid of the stuff and the parts of the house that we don't really need. The hallways, as functional as they may be, the walk-in wardrobes, the en-suites, yeah, they're nice, but do you want to spend the next 20 years paying for them? I don't. So we keep the parts of the house that we do need, and we get rid of the parts of the house that we don't really need. The hallways, the en-suites, the formal this, the informal that, etc. The average tiny house, around about a tenth of the size of the typical house. And they can go smaller than that. There's a couple in Sydney that 2 years ago built a tiny house that's 12 foot long, 6 foot wide. A little bit too tiny for me, but it is a full house. It's got a bathroom, it's got a kitchen, beautiful little place, but generally tiny houses are about sort of 24-ish metres square. To give you an idea what that might look like, my partner and I are about to start building our tiny house in the next couple of weeks, and we're going to be building on a 9 metre long trailer, probably about the size of this carpeted area here, by 2.5 metres wide, by about 4.2 metres tall. What's that? Perhaps about the size of the stage actually, and about this high off the ground as well. So yes, they are small, but they're very well designed. And as Jay Schaefer says, it's kind of like Lego meets IKEA and they get together. So I love that quote from Jay Schaefer. Jay is widely known as one of the pioneers of the tiny house movement. He's a tiny house architect and designer from the USA. He's been living in small spaces and tiny houses for the last 18 years. That's his very first tiny house that he built. Actually, it might be I think it's his third. But he's widely known in the USA. But why are people doing this? Why are people, over and above the cost, why are people looking at doing this and seriously looking at a tiny house? Firstly, the cost. We've addressed that. You don't have to go out and get a $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 mortgage. The average cost to build a tiny house is anywhere between $5,000 and $100,000. We've got a friend of ours here in Victoria who has built his tiny house. He spent a grand total of $12,000 and he's done. He's finished. He's living in it with his wife and child. He did use a lot of recycled materials and free, reclaimed, donated materials, and I've got a photo of Murray's place a little bit later. So that's at one end of the spectrum. It depends on how much of the work you do yourself and how much you contract out. Murray did pretty much everything himself. We helped on the deck, but that was cool. At the other end of the spectrum, I know someone in Australia that spent close on $100,000 on his tiny house because he got it outsourced and fitted out by a professional company. So it depends on how much you do yourself, how much you contract out. So there's the cost of actually building it. There's also the cost of heating it. It's only a small space. And as my partner and I found out last winter when we were in our caravan cooking pasta, you don't need much heat to heat up a small space. So they're cheaper to heat in the winter time. They're a lot cheaper to cool in the summertime. Also the cost savings. You know, if you're in a small space, you don't have 4 bedrooms and 3 living rooms to furnish, so you save money by not having to buy all these different bits of furniture. So the cost savings. The environmental side of things. Tiny houses have a very minimal impact on the environment. They're on wheels, so they can be moved, and moved with a fairly minimal amount of fuss. And once they have been moved, the next day, you would never know they were there. In contrast, normal residential construction has a significant impact on the environment. There's a lot of land use that's used, a lot of land that's used, a lot of materials, a lot of embodied energy, and the resources that go into a traditional house, and there's a lot of waste and a lot of landfill that's produced as a result. The third reason I sort of put in the bucket of emotional, it's really about this idea of going back to basics, simplifying their life, hitting the reset button. Perhaps they're rebuilding from a divorce or a financial collapse, or maybe they're just overworked, overstressed, and they say, you know what, I'm just going to step back and work out, what am I doing? You know, what do I want from life? Who am I? Where am I going? And all that sort of stuff. Another example of a tiny house from the States here showing that they can indeed be moved. Now, you need a serious vehicle to be able to tow these things. They're not a caravan, they're heavy, and they're not aerodynamic at all. They've got the aerodynamics of, well, a house, right? But they can be towed, but you need a serious four-wheel drive. In Australia, we have some weight limits, which I'll go into a little bit later. In a nutshell, you have to keep the whole thing, house and trailer, under 4,500 kilograms. If you keep it under 3,500 kilograms, you can get your Land Rover Discoveries and your Ford Raiders and Ford Colorados, those kind of things to tow them. If you're between 3.5 to 4.5, you really look at it like a Dodge Ram, a Ford F350, which in Australia means really a tow truck. But they can be moved. So that's one from the States. Who's doing this, and more importantly, who can benefit from a tiny house in this country? As you can see there, there's an enormous range of types of people. Not everyone, it's not going to be for everyone, but it's going to suit a lot of people. Young adults, as they're getting ready to leave home, rather than going into a share house, we've all done it, a share house with six other people, they can maybe opt for building their own tiny house or building it with their parents, family bonding. And then when they're ready to move out, they can take their house with them, or they can live independently of mum and dad in the backyard if you've got the space. University students, you know, as people are graduating and trying to get their careers underway and they want to focus on their studies rather than panicking about the weekly rent. We've all done it. I remember when I was on Austudy and juggling rent, food, do I eat or do I pay the rent? What do I do? University graduates, when they finish university, they're trying to get their careers underway. Single parents, low-income earners, business people, freelancers. I came across a lady in the States on Facebook a couple of days ago. She's living out of, like, you know those little Holden combo vans, those little half vans? She's living out of one of those. She's a freelance graphic designer. She travels, she surfs, and she travels the US in one of those. And that's her house. She's got everything that she needs in there. It's amazing. So business people, freelancers, environmentalists, minimalists, people that just don't need and don't want a lot of stuff. Perfect for them. People rebuilding, as I said, coming back from financial issues or divorce. Empty nesters, the kids have grown up, they've left the house. Mum and dad are still very active, very healthy, very independent, but they don't want the upkeep and the maintenance of a large suburban home. It could suit them as well. Retirees, people that have health issues and disabilities. People that have health issues that maybe they can't physically work full-time hours. And even the people that are working full-time hours have struggled meeting rents and mortgage payments, let alone people that can only physically handle part-time work. And other opportunities, if you want to get into the Airbnb side of things, build a tiny house, put it in your backyard, or put it on your rural property and rent it out. It can be done, it has been done. And also one that's not on there, of course, is small business owners. You know, if you want to have a kebab truck or a hot dog stand or a coffee shop, that's a good idea. I still think it's a good idea. That looks like a tiny house. Why not? It would draw attention. Just showing you that tiny houses come in all shapes and sizes, and they're not just in the USA, not just here. This is from a French tiny house building company, La Tiny House, I think it's called. But they've done about 20 tiny houses, all different designs. That's a beautiful one there. Advantages. Do they have advantages? Yes, they do. They're portable. You can take it with you. So imagine a tiny house in your backyard. You might be renting it out to your oldest son. You might be renting it out purely as a rental type of thing. When you go to sell your property, you can either sell it with the tiny house. I was thinking about this last night. You can sell the property with the tiny house. It's an Airbnb property ready to go. It's a granny flat ready to go. It would add value to the property. If you don't want to sell it with the house, sell the house, take the tiny house and move on. The cost to build, obviously dramatically less to build, cheaper to heat, cheaper to cool, as we said, very energy efficient, easier and faster to clean. 15 minutes, you're done, you've tidied the entire place. The design freedom as well, and what I mean by that is tiny house, if you want to build your own granny flat or your own house, you have to go through the permitting process and council permits. You've got to meet building codes. These are not buildings. They're not permanent structures. Therefore, building codes and council permits don't apply. So it means you've got the design freedom to go as creative as you want. There was a tiny house that I saw in the States, and the way that they got from downstairs up to the sleeping loft was a climbing wall, a rock climbing wall. There were a couple of avid rock climbers and fitness trainers. Very cool. Empowerment as well. With a tiny house, you can actually build your own house. We've got a photo of Stuart here in a little bit. Stuart came to our very first tiny house building workshop. He'd never really built anything before in his life. 1 year of weekends later, he's living in his tiny house with his partner. So it gives people that empowerment to teach them that I can actually build my own house. It means you can become less reliant on the system. You don't have to be connected to the grid. You don't have to be reliant on, can we do this, Mr. Council? Yes, we can. No, we can't. A lot of tiny houses can very easily be built so they're totally off grid, so you don't need to be connected to the electricity grid and the gas grid. Freedom from your stuff. I know you know what I mean when I say sometimes you get to a point where you feel your stuff owns you. You don't have that in a tiny house because you only have space for a certain amount of stuff. So you can take the stuff that really means the most to you, the things that you actually need rather than the things that you just happen to have accumulated over your life. And one really good point that my partner brought up last night is when you live in a house, you have memories. You've raised the kids there. You have all sorts of memories that go along with your house. And when you sell it, you've got to kind of leave those memories. You take the memories with you, but you've got to leave the house behind and you go start the next chapter of your life at the next house. With a tiny house, you don't actually have to do that. You can take your tiny house with you and the memories come along with you. Another tiny house from the States, this is one from Zilvado. There's a guy called Abel who's a master craftsman, as you can see. Beautiful tiny house there. Do they have disadvantages? Yes, they do. Can anyone guess the obvious one? They are very small, right? You don't have a lot of space for your things. Even less if you're a couple, even less if you're a family. And just on that, there are families successfully living in tiny houses all over the world. Limited capital growth, okay? People are generally not building these things because it's a great investment and they're going to increase in value. For those of you that are lucky enough to own your own property or to own it outright, fabulous. You guys will be wrapped. Your property prices are going up and up and up. If you're not a homeowner and you're trying to get in the door of the property market, that $695,000 average price is not a number you want to see. But the capital growth is one thing that you do get, I'll admit, out of a traditional house. If you can manage to sustain the mortgage payments, your property will grow in value over time. However, the other side of that, and what I look at is, yeah, but what's the trade-off? The trade-off is, in a tiny house, you don't get the capital growth, but the trade-off is you don't have that monthly financial pressure every month where you've got to go to work, possibly in a job you don't like, to make these mortgage payments, being away from the things that you really want to be doing, the people that you want to be spending time with. So there's a lack of space, enforced minimalism, they're hard to finance. It will happen over time, but at the moment, if you go to a bank, firstly, a bank has probably never even heard of these things. You might be able to, the only way you'd probably be able to get it financed at the moment is maybe through a line of credit. If you've got equity in your house and you can pull out a line of credit, or if you put it on a personal loan or credit card and do it bit by bit, pay it off as you go. Uncertain resale value, that's only because of the fact that the majority of tiny houses in Australia have been built by the owners. It's their own personal homes. And the market hasn't matured enough yet to a point where they're turning them over and reselling them. It will happen eventually. In the States, I heard figures of there's over 10,000 tiny houses that have been built in the States. In Australia at the moment, we know of 43 builds at the moment that are going on, the majority in Melbourne actually. But that's just the ones that we know of. That's the ones that have contacted us, say, I've got a blog, here's my Facebook page, follow along and we're documenting our progress. There's a lot of others that would just be under the radar, being built as well. Where to park them, that's another grey area, because at the moment, as I'll go through in a moment, can we do it in Australia? Yes, we can build them, we can get them on the roads. Is it legal? Are we allowed to live permanently as our home in a tiny house? At the moment, not really. Councils don't really know what a tiny house is. And generally, I know it's a sweeping generalisation and this will change over time, but generally Councils will look at it and go, that looks like a caravan. Yeah, we'll put that in the same category as a caravan. You can't live in a caravan in Australia full time, even though we know that there's thousands of people all over the country that are. So that's a grey area, but it will change, and it's not stopping people doing this. It's difficult for inner cities because these things are not subtle. As I said, my partner and I spent 12 months in a vintage caravan in a driveway in Murrumbeena. No issues at all. In fact, I thought, it's just going to require someone to dob us in. On day 3, she locked herself out of the house. She had to go knock at the elderly neighbour next door. And she said, hello dear, are you the lady that's living next door in the caravan? So the cat was all out of the bag, but that was fine. But what I'm saying is caravans are fairly subtle. You can get away with it in a caravan because many people have caravans in their driveway. If you've got something even like that, but if you've got something, 7 metres long, 4 metres high, blocking out your neighbour's sun, it's going to be obvious, it's not very subtle at all, and you may get complaints from the council. The council views on it, as I said, they sort of class them as a caravan, and you're not allowed to live in a caravan, but that will change over time. One of the other disadvantages for some people perhaps is it forces you to deal with your own personal waste. Because these are totally off-grid, don't panic, there are 2 ways you can go with the toilet issue. You can either go a commercial composting toilet, which is about $2,500, and you only have to deal with emptying it once every 6 or 12 months. Or you can do the old traditional bucket toilet where you cover your business with organic matter and then empty it once a week or so into the compost pile and do it a bit old school. Both work. Another design there, this one was only completed a couple of months ago in the States, a beautiful tiny house, which just reminds us that in a tiny house we don't have the space, right? That's a given. But it means that they have to be very, very well designed. Every space needs to be multifunctional. Multifunctional spaces fold down this, slide out this, convertible that. This particular one has a slide out dining table from underneath the kitchen floor. It's got a rolly garage door type window that comes up, fold down deck. Beautiful design there. So can we do it here in Australia? Yes, we can. And as I said, there's 43 people that we know of at the moment doing it. And about 12 of those are here in Victoria. So we can, as an example of one of our Australian builds, so we can do it in Australia. If you can go out in the garden and build yourself a dog kennel, you can build one of these. As I said, council permits are irrelevant. That doesn't matter. The only authority that is going to be interested in what you're doing is Vic Roads, and that's only if you want to get it on the road. If you're not putting it on the road, they don't care either. And just on that, you can get it on the road in Australia. There are some size and width and height requirements that you need to meet. In a nutshell, you have to keep the whole thing. Now this is if you want to be able to hook it up to your vehicle and tow it around anywhere, move it anywhere, anytime. If you want to be able to do that and not deal with oversized trailer permits, then you have to keep the whole thing under 2.5 metres wide. You have to keep the whole thing under 4.3 metres tall from the road to the highest point of the roof. And you need to keep the whole trailer or the whole house under 12.5 metres long. The length is not so much of an issue because the big thing that a lot of people have on their mind in the tiny house community is that you have to keep the whole thing under 4.5 tonne. Now, Lisa and myself, we're about to build a 9-metre trailer and we're a bit nervous about keeping it underweight. In fact, we were speaking to some of the exhibitors about their products and we asked someone, how much does that bath weigh? And he looked at me, what do you mean? Who cares how much it weighs? What's that? But it's a valid question for someone building a tiny house. So they're legal to build, they're legal to move on the road. As I said, the grey area is, can we live in them legally in Australia? And that's a question that is evolving, shall we say. The people that are doing it have currently, yep.
4.5 tonne, does that include the weight of the trailer?
Yeah, 4.5 tonne is the trailer plus the house. And there's an example that I'll show you where there's a house that's been done in Victoria and she knows the weight and she's told me, so it's given us a bit of a sigh of relief in terms of our build as well. So as I said, it's a great area. For those of you that are interested, the US tiny house movement is a fair bit more along than we are. As I said, thousands and thousands of tiny houses that have been built. There is a documentary that has been released a week ago called Living Tiny Legally on YouTube. And it follows the process of several tiny house builders, personal builders that have approached their local council and cities and said, well, how can we work together? How can we address this issue. I love the city, I want to stay in the city, but I'm being priced out. How can we work with the city to make this doable? And there's many people in the States that are living in tiny houses totally legally now. So hopefully that'll be the start and the start of a conversation that we can have with our local councils as well. So as I said, this is Kirsten's place in New South Wales. So she's partway through building that, doing an amazing job. This is Ashley's place down here in Victoria. Now, that house is on an 8.5 metre trailer, and Ashley has weighed everything except for the nails and the screws. So I thought that's good enough for me. I contacted her a few weeks ago. I said, where are we at weight-wise? Tell me the number. And she said she's just over 4,000 kilograms. So that gives us a sigh of relief, and we think maybe we can do 9. That should be right. That's the interior of Ashley's place just before she moved in. So you've got a bathroom at the end, kitchen, a bit more bench space than I've had in some of the apartments I've lived in actually. Storage stairs there. And again, just a reminder that every place, every part of a tiny house has to be used. Multifunctional spaces, multifunctional storage. Using the vertical space, and every little bit of storage helps. This is Murray's place, $12,000, he's done. Very rustic, not everyone's taste perhaps, but it was done with an old, was it an old caravan? I think it was an old caravan trailer. He ripped the top off and he built on that. Interestingly, these fence palings on the bottom there that he clad, from what Murray told me. Murray, if you see this, I hope I get the story right. I think they were donated to him from a local farmer, a neighbouring farmer who was going to just burn them or chuck them away. He said, I'll have those. So he clad the bottom part of his house, and then he thought, hang on, I need a kitchen bench. So what he did was he got some of these old fence palings, ran them through a thicknesser, took them back to brand new wood, put them all together, glued and screwed and however he did it, and now he's got a beautiful custom designer kitchen bench that would probably cost thousands if he got it made. As the interior of Murray's place, very multifunctional. In fact, Murray's got a very unique feature. He's got French doors here, which open up to the deck, which is great, but where the French doors hinge on the wall's got a hinge as well, and the wall opens up, so the entire front of that house opens up to the deck. Because in Australia, this is another reason why tiny houses are so adaptable to Australia, because in Australia, the climate lends itself to being outside. How many of us want a deck, an al fresco outdoor area? So he's got a deck that almost doubles the size of his house. At the other end of the spectrum and the other end of the country, we've got Andrew and Lara's place up in Brisbane. Very much Brisbane, subtropical climate. Very much a Queenslandy, open, tropical, more modern feel as well. Place is full of, bifold doors and bifold windows, so a lovely little place there by Andrew and Lara. Another couple of examples. This is one, I think it's the Free Home Tiny House Project on Facebook, and they are in WA. They're still in the midst of building, but we're keen to get over there to WA and visit them. An enormous set of bifold doors on the front, so that'll, again, I'd imagine they're probably going to have a deck out the front that'll open the place up to the outdoors as well. And this is Stuart. Stuart came along to our very first tiny house building workshop. We've run several in the past. We are going to get them kicked off again. And we're wanting to do at least another one this year, and then we'll get back into 3 or 4 next year. But tiny house buildings, workshops where people can get on the tools in a group of about 10 or 12 people, get their hands dirty and actually build, obviously not a full house over 3 or 4 day workshops, but we build a little pod that shows people how to do a stud wall, how to put the cladding on, interior and exterior, how to do the insulation, how to put the roof on, how to put a door in, how to put a window in, etc. So Stuart spent 1 year of weekends building his tiny house. He spent, I think, somewhere between $40,000 to $45,000, I think. He did a lot of the work himself. So, as I said, we're not saying that tiny houses are going to be the be-all, end-all solution for everyone. It's going to suit everyone in every situation. But for a lot of people, as it was for me when I first saw them, for a lot of people, they're going to make sense. In fact, we were speaking to a gentleman after the presentation yesterday, who's an older gentleman. He said, I've still got an enormous mortgage, but I could sell the thing and walk away with $80,000, $90,000, $100,000. He said, I could just build one of these and be mortgage free. I said, you could. So for a lot of people, that want to lead a more sustainable life, who want to lead a more simplistic, intentional life, and they don't want to be tied down with enormous amounts of debt and financial pressure, and they want to focus on life and what it has to offer, the relationships they have, the experiences they can share with people that are close to them. This may actually work really well. Now, just before I finish off, we actually got a message on Facebook last night from one of our Facebook followers, young Ella, who's here in the front row of the audience. Can I show the people your house? Is that okay? She did a school project, and I'll come back to this one in a minute. She did a school project with a beautiful model of a tiny house. I saw this like at 10 o'clock last night, and I'm messaging her mum saying, can I show people this? This is cool. So Ella, you did an amazing job with your tiny house. Tiny house model there. And the interior there, it's got a loft, it's got a bathroom, it's very cool. And that's the exterior of your tiny house there. So was that for a little school project, was it, or? Excellent. We'll have to do a video, a YouTube interview with Ella if she's open to it. But as I was saying, and as you can see, tiny houses are capturing the imagination of people of all ages. My 11-year-old daughter, she wants to build one, she's already designed one. She came to me the other day with actually about a year ago, she came to me with a floor plan. She said, what do you think? I said, it's fantastic, but the bathroom might need to be a little bit wider than sort of 2 feet wide. Let's rejig the proportions a little bit. But she loves the idea as well. But look, if any of you guys want to find out any more about the tiny house movement and the advantages of tiny houses, Google it, YouTube it. We're on Facebook, Tiny Houses Australia on Facebook and Instagram and website as well. If any of you want to come and have a chat to me and Lisa, we're here after the presentation to the side of stage. If anyone has any questions now, more than happy to try and answer them.
Yeah, just raise your hand, anyone who has a question, and I'll bring the mic over.
Because I can talk for a week on this topic.
Any questions? Yep.
Hi Darren, my name's Daryl.
Hi, how you doing?
Yeah, good. You're kind of talking about the you don't need council approval,
Yes.
legislation and stuff.
Yeah.
So how do you kind of deal with health, safety, if you build this thing
Well,
in terms of liability and stuff?
Sure. Well, really, it comes down to the onus is on yourself. So the people that are building this, and this is the way I look at it. If I'm going to go and spend $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 of my own money, I'm not going to build something that's going to fall down on me. I'm not going to build something that's going to be a death trap. I'm not going to build something that's going to be not well ventilated, that's going to be mentally detrimental to my health, that I don't even want to, I cringe every time I come home. Because the one thing that I did want to leave you guys with is this reminder that for the people that are actually doing this, people need to understand that for the people that are actually building these tiny houses, it's a conscious decision. It's not that they've given up. It's not that they're, oh, well, we can't afford a big house, so we'll just settle for this thing, even though it's depressing as hell, right? For the majority of people that are doing this, it's a conscious decision. I don't know if any of you have heard of this show on TV in the States called Tiny House Nation. The host of Tiny House Nation, Zach Giffen, he describes tiny houses as a tool, because it's not really about the house at all. It's about the lifestyle. It's about extracting yourself, being able to extract yourself from the system, being able to take control of yourself, design a life that you want so that you can do the things that you want. So rather than being tied down with debt, have the freedom to get creative and build your own house, grow your own vegetables, get healthy. And so yeah, it's a conscious decision. This is actually what they want. And in fact, Lisa and I were discussing the other night, if we won the lottery, what would we do? We'd still build a tiny house. We'd get a nicer block of land, but we'd still build a tiny house. So that's it there. But with councils, the majority of what people are generally doing is they're just doing it, and they're just not telling the council, because they're not hurting the environment, they're not hurting anyone, they're not, as long as they're not growing anything they shouldn't and doing anything they shouldn't, they're fine. In fact, Fred, a gentleman here at Melbourne, an American gentleman, he built a house last year or the year before, and there's a video actually on YouTube he put out where the council inspectors came round. The council got wind that he was building in the front yard of his in-laws' house. The council came round, and I went and saw Fred, and I had a tour of his house, and he was telling me about it. But he said as soon as they, and this is on YouTube as well, you can check it out, he said as soon as they walked up the driveway and saw that it was on wheels, they knew where their job started and where their job ended. Then the conversation just became, that's cool, can I have a look through? How did you do it? This is cool. So it's not really about, it's about knowing what requires, council permits and all that, and what doesn't. A friend of mine in Queensland who's got a tiny house, he's got someone he knows who works for the Gold Coast Council, and they said, we don't want to know. If there's a complaint by a neighbour, then we're obliged to follow it up, and we'll be following it up. Whether anything comes of that or not is to be seen, but the key is, and what I've said to people in my community is, find an appropriate block of land on the fringe of Melbourne where there's acres and acres of land. Find a landowner that's got some vacant land. Are you using that field over there? No. How about I pay you $500 a month? I don't need to be connected up to anything, and I'll just park under your tree. You'll never hear peep from me. Okay, cool. Right? So there's opportunities, and that's what people are doing. It's not ideal. Ideally, we'd love to have the golden tick of approval from the council, but it's about being sensible. If you try and take one of those tiny houses and shoehorn it into a South Yarra garden, Melbourne City Council is going to be on your tail really quick, because the neighbours are going to complain, and I probably don't blame them. So it's a grey area, but over time, as more and more people build these things, council will start to hopefully see that they are of actually benefit to Australia as well. What's that, honey? Documentaries. Yes, they're great. Oh yes, I talked about the documentary. Yeah, Living Tiny Legally on YouTube. Documentary about the process that a lot of people in the US are following to actually work with their councils to get the council's approval. Because in Australia, as you guys know, some councils are more green and more environmentally conscious and focused on sustainability issues than others. But they also want to look after the people in their council regions as well. So they want to work with you, but yeah, that situation will change as time goes on. So as I said, if anyone's got any other questions, more than happy to help. Otherwise, we'll be over here if anyone wants to come say hi.